The Not So Perfect Pair by StarcollectorSilas. Chapter 6. Chuya now dreaded getting dressed. He was in the same PJs as the night before, and the last thing he wanted was to see what injuries had been added to his soulmate's body. While brushing his teeth, he had noticed a faint blue tint to his cheek, and had spent a few seconds panicking over that before deciding his soulmate must have fell or something. After a few moments, he realized he was running out of time and really did need to get dressed, so he quickly shucked his shirt and trousers, and he went to change his underwear, pulling them down and gagging at the sight of the bright blue marks over the sides of his hips. Those had not been there the day before. He took a deep breath and pulled on his uniform, adding the hoodie Dazai had given him yesterday. He actually stopped to eat breakfast this time, some toast set out on the table for him. His parents were nowhere to be seen, and the only person in the kitchen with him was Kyoka, sitting with a bowl of something chocolatey. She was a rather quiet child, but observant and artistic. As Chuya devoured his toast as quickly as possible, he noticed her gaze on him. He paused, looking back at her as he swallowed his final bit of food. He got up and put his plate next to the sink as she spoke. Koyo left earlier than usual today, and Mom is still sleeping. I need help with my hair, she said, turning in her chair to look at Chuya. Chuya blinked, confused as to why she would ask him. "Where's Dad?" is what he ended up asking, eyeing the long black hair falling down her back. Where Koyo and Chuya had bright curly red hair, Kyoka was the opposite, pin straight and near black hair. Kyoka huffed. "He did breakfast, and Mom normally does that because he has to work, so he's currently rushing to get ready," she said, now getting up to rinse her bowl and put it with Chuya's plate. "Surely you know the basics of hairstyling," she continued, looking pointedly at the loose hair falling around Chuya's shoulder. Chuya blinked. He had actually forgotten he had been growing his hair out. He sighed. "I can only really do a ponytail. Dazai is the one who normally does the things like braids." Kyoka nodded. She handed him a hair tie. "Try anyway," she demanded, turning around. Chuya sighed, but obliged, trying his best to gather her hair into what could maybe be considered a ponytail. After a few tries that only resulted in weird bumps and a broken hair tie, he gave up, groaning in frustration. "I can't do it," he said with annoyance, staying careful not to shout, not wanting to alarm his little sister. Kyoka just stared at the broken tie and sighed. "Dazai will be outside waiting for you by now. Get him to teach you," she said, pulling out another hair tie from seemingly nowhere. With that, Kyoka grabbed her bag and Chuya had to scramble after her, slinging his own bag over his shoulder. Indeed, Dazai was outside staring into space. He looked over when Kyoka wordlessly shoved the hair tie into his hand and turned her back to him. He raised an eyebrow at Chuya, who threw his hands up in defeat. "Koyo left early and I can't do anyone else's hair," he explained quickly, still annoyed at his lack of competence in hair-related artistry. Dazai snickered, already working out a French braid into Kyoka's hair. "Damn, Chuya, you really should take the time to learn these kinds of skills, you know. They come in handy," Dazai teased, and Chuya felt something warm curl in his chest. Jealousy, he guessed? Unfamiliar with the feeling. Maybe he's annoyed that Dazai seems to get on so well with other people. That must be it. It didn't quite feel like jealousy, but he ignored the part of him that pointed out the way his face felt warm. It's the sun. Dazai had finished the braid quickly, and Kyoka didn't leave like Chuya expected. Instead, her eyes went to the hoodie Chuya had on. "You'll get a heat stroke if you wear that all day," she remarked. She looked interested. She was smart, and for a moment, Chuya was reminded of Dazai when he was at her age, just without the perpetual unease that surrounds Dazai. Chuya shook that thought away and shrugged. "I'll be fine," he said dismissively. Kyoka blinked, tilting her head. "You're hiding something." She glanced at Dazai, her eyebrows furrowing. "You both are." Dazai and Chuya exchanged glances. "I can guess it's bad. You should probably tell Mom and Dad, or at least Koyo. I don't want to know, but you should tell an adult." With that, Kyoka walked away, the single braid down her back swaying slightly as she left. Chuya felt dumbstruck. Dazai looked amused. The thing was, Kyoka was right. A part of Chuya had been screaming at him that he needed to tell someone. There was a person out there who was covered in self-harm wounds. Adding to them, and Chuya was no longer sure what to make of the blue tinge to his skin when he had woken up, which had faded quickly. But he couldn't. He should, but he felt uneasy. How was he supposed to broach this subject? Who does he tell, and what does he tell them? What happens when he finds out who his soulmate is, and something that was supposed to be a secret gets thrown out into the open? The conflict was eating at him. He hadn't even noticed that they started walking to school until he almost tripped over a curb. He lost his balance and Dazai caught him, gripping his arm and pulling him upright again. He hissed in pain at the sudden jolt, and Dazai let go. They continued walking, and Dazai was seemingly too lost in thought to make a comment on Chuya's trip. Weird, he thought, not making much of it. Another part in his brain screamed something incomprehensible at him. His thoughts had been making a habit of fighting with each other. He was so confused. There was more marks when I woke up, on my hips, he said, grabbing Dazai's attention. Dazai looked mildly ill for a moment before smoothing his expression over. The garbled thoughts in the traitorous corner of his brain seemed to feed off of the slight expression change, and Chuya ignored it again. Instead, his arm was grabbed by Dazai, who began poking at it through the cloth. When all he got was a raised eyebrow, he slipped his hand under the sleeve to poke at the skin. Chuya sighed. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked irritably. Dazai let go, humming softly. "I did some research, and some people say that their soulmate marks hurt to touch. I was trying to test that theory." Chuya recoiled. "By doing something that could hurt me?" he exclaimed, eyes wide, but not really mad. He would have done the same. Dazai paid no mind to Chuya's seething. "It wouldn't have hurt badly, just stung a little." Chuya scowled. "It's the principle of the thing," he retaliated, and Dazai snickered. Okay, calm down. Quit yapping. I'm so sorry," Dazai said, and Chuya kicked him. Dazai made a fake yelp of pain, dramatically jumping and wailing about being attacked by a dog. Chuya was so caught up in his fury and, much to his further annoyance, amusement, that he didn't notice the slight painful tingling on his left shin, right where he had just kicked Dazai. Chapter 7. Trigger warning for self-harm in this specific chapter. Please take care of yourself. By lunchtime, Kyoka's statement about the weather being too warm to wear a jumper was proven true. Chuya had spent the day feeling like his brain was melting and barely paying attention, so now, at lunch, sitting under the shade of the tree him and his friends spent their lunch at, he had the worst headache of his life. He sighed, rubbing his forehead and slightly cursing the warm weather that he normally loved so much. A heat wave at the end of April was normally welcomed, but he couldn't stand it now. He looked up again as Dazai came over with a bag of food from the nearest store, and he tossed a water bottle at Chuya before sitting down next to him, their backs against the tree. "Thanks," Chuya grumbled, sighing and instantly opening the bottle, taking a big gulp. Dazai's eyebrows furrowed in concern, and he handed Chuya a sandwich from the bag of food, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he just pressed himself into Chuya's side, the contact subtle but there. For some reason, Chuya felt warmer. Sitting around them, some of their other friends watched with concern as Chuya squinted in the light and winced at the sound of cheering coming from a nearby lunch table. Rampo, Yosano, Kunikida, Atsushi, and Akutagawa were all clustered together in the shade, eating their various food, and while the area was normally alive with conversation, it was quiet aside from the ambience from the other students, the sound of the wind in the tree they sat under, the loudest thing coming from their little group. Yosano glanced at Kunikida, who shrugged. Then she addressed Chuya as she started rooting through her bag. "You should really take that hoodie off. It's too warm and you're going to get sick," she said while moving to tie her hair up, and Chuya felt a bit guilty as he noticed the worry in her tone. He looked down at his hands instead of responding and unwrapped the sandwich Dazai gave him, feeling slightly nauseous at the idea of eating anything. His silence only seemed to spur Yosano on further though, so she continued. "I know you just got it, but I'm sure Dazai will understand if you take it off. Even Dazai isn't wearing a hoodie, and he always does," she said, and Kunikida nodded. "Yeah, if Dazai's too warm, we're all screwed," Kunikida joked, but it was impossible to miss the concerned strain in his voice. There were a few quiet laughs, and Chuya chuckled a little, but he felt Dazai shift next to him and cross his arms, almost defensively. Chuya's eyes felt drawn to the movement, staring at the white fabric covering the skin. Dazai had bandages wrapped over every inch of skin on his arms, and likely the rest of his body. Chuya knew this, but to actually see the bandages for once was different to just knowing that they were there. Dazai had started wearing them one day with no apparent or consistent reason. It started with a simple wrist bandage, explained as a sprained wrist, then eventually grew until it was full length of both of his arms and occasionally his eye or neck. Mori explained it as skin hypersensitivity when Chuya's parents had asked about it, concerned at the way a 12-year-old Dazai had fumbled while trying to say it wasn't important. Apparently, any contact on Dazai's skin, particularly his arms and legs, could result in pain and bruising. What Chuya didn't understand was why he covered them all the time if having something touch his skin hurts, or why it only seemed to affect other areas sometimes. Still, he didn't question it. He just knew Dazai normally hid the bandages under his clothes when he could, not liking the attention that they drew. So it really was a big deal that Dazai wasn't wearing a hoodie. Suddenly Rampo spoke, fully opening his normally squinted eyes. "You're hiding your soulmate mark, aren't you?" he asked, tone mildly curious. Chuya blinked in surprise. He had only started hanging out with Dazai's friends after his old friends had pushed him away, and while he had fit in easily, the intelligence which most of his friends, and especially Rampo, displayed was often surprising. His shocked expression was enough confirmation for Rampo, and Rampo raised an eyebrow, taking a few more seconds before his eyes widened further and he fell quiet, looking at Dazai with an unreadable expression. Chuya shifted and sighed. "Yeah, I'm hiding my soulmate mark," he huffed out eventually. Dazai tensed next to him, and Atsushi spoke up, sounding confused. "Why are you hiding it? Do you not like your soulmate?" Chuya shifted again, and took a bite of his sandwich to avoid answering, looking down at the grass he was sitting on, suddenly very interested in the golden pattern of the sun through the leaves. "It's complicated," Dazai said instead, a surprisingly sharp tone to his voice. Kunikida nodded, as though having a realization. "Oh, you guys don't want other people to know your soulmates until you're both ready," he said sympathetically, and Atsushi and Akutagawa both went, "Oh," in understanding. Chuya went red, mouth falling open at how easily that conclusion was reached and accepted. "That's not it! That shitty mackerel is not my soulmate! I'd never go out with him!" Chuya said quickly in response, and he stood up, crossing his arms. "I did not come here to discuss my soulmate. Let's go, Dazai," he said, and Dazai, who had been staring vacantly at the ground, looked up quickly. Dazai stood to follow and gathered their stuff, complaining as normal. "Chuya, you can't just insult me like that and expect me to follow. You're my dog, not the other way around." The whiny complaint was met with deaf ears when Chuya took the first few steps to leave and got hit by a wave of dizziness, and Chuya made a slightly hissing sound, effectively shutting Dazai up. He stopped abruptly, instinctively holding out a hand to try and grab onto something. When Dazai went quiet, all eyes moved to fall on Chuya, and he could feel them watching with various degrees of worry. "Chuya? Are you okay?" Atsushi asked hesitantly. Chuya blinked a few times, suddenly feeling very sick. His head hurt so badly, and the world was spinning. His throat felt dry, and he found himself wishing he had drank more water. "Chuya?" Dazai asked, taking a step forward, and Chuya shook his head. "I'm fine," he said angrily, voice wavering. Chuya started walking again, the world blurry and his hands shaking. Then he suddenly wasn't walking anymore, and his legs gave out under him. Dazai was quick to catch him as he fell backwards, and Chuya briefly registered Dazai's panicked expression, his eyes half closed and black spots dancing through his vision. Dazai's eyes were wide with panic and surprise, and his hands were on Chuya's face. Dazai was trying to get Chuya to respond, but he was just so tired he would much rather just admire Dazai. "He rarely looks so genuine," Chuya briefly thought, before confusingly shaking the thought away. "He's so dizzy." There was too much going on. A small crowd had quickly gathered, and Kunikida was trying to wave everyone away. Yosana was kneeling next to him, and he heard her announcing that someone was too warm and had fainted. "That must suck," he thought tiredly, and the last thing Chuya heard was Dazai shouting for someone to get the nurse. Chuya woke up on an uncomfortable table with a headache and an annoying buzzing in his ear, sickly fluorescent lights making his eyes hurt. He pushed himself up with a wince, groaning slightly as he shivered in the cool air, and he was instantly greeted with a pair of arms around his shoulders. A quick whiff of strawberry told him who it was, and he gave Dazai a one-armed hug back, the other one still holding himself up. "What happened?" he asked tiredly, and Dazai pulled away, seemingly have decided that Chuya was okay enough that it was safe to be an annoying asshole again. "You fainted. You know how slugs can't go on salt because it dries them out and they need water? It was like that. You were too dried out. Maybe I should carry around a doggy bowl for you to drink from. This way this doesn't happen again." Dazai rambled as he pushed Chuya's leg from the metal bed and then sat next to him, pressing into his side like he had at lunch. "A good owner doesn't let their dog get dehydrated. And I did try. You should have drunk more of the water I gave you. That was very alarming, you know, and I had to catch you. You know, for being so small, you really are uncomfortable to carry. I had to get Kanikida to help me take you here." Chuya sighed, rubbing his forehead and closing his eyes. Dazai's voice was ringing in his ears and making him clench his jaw, but it was better than the previous buzzing, which had faded when Dazai started talking. He took a deep breath as Dazai kept talking, tuning out whatever he was saying, getting to skip class to sit with him or something. As Dazai talked, he felt horribly tense next to him, and when Chuya heard the school nurse enter the room, Dazai jumped slightly. Chuya just took Dazai's hand in his, holding on to it, not entirely sure why he had in the first place. To comfort him, probably. "Calm down, Dazai. Chuya will likely still have a sore head." Chuya looked up in confusion at the rough and deep voice, squinting and taking in the sight of Mr. Fukuzawa, the principal, standing in front of him. "Mr. Fukuzawa? Where is Mrs. Alcott?" Chuya asked, wincing at the sound of his own voice ringing in his ears. "Miss Alcott is dealing with another student," Fukuzawa explained, pulling over a chair to sit in front of the metal bed he and Dazai were on. Dazai seemed to have relaxed slightly at the sight of Fukuzawa, just leaning onto Chuya's shoulder slightly, but Chuya kept holding onto his hand anyway. "How long was I asleep for?" Chuya asked, and at the reminder of why they were here, Dazai suddenly pushed another bottle of water into Chuya's hands. Chuya took it and opened it, letting go of Dazai's hand in order to do so, to which Dazai pouted dramatically. "It wasn't long, 25 minutes at most. There was a moment when you came out of it and then just fell back asleep," Fukuzawa said, watching approvingly as Chuya quickly downed half of the bottle. Chuya nodded, swallowing and then speaking again. "That's not too bad. I was just dehydrated, I think. Should be fine to go back to class." "As long as you keep hydrated, yes," Fukuzawa agreed, and he got up to close the door before returning to his seat. Chuya shifted uncomfortably, the air changing to be more solemn and apprehensive. After a moment, Fukuzawa sighed, the sound drawn out and hesitant. "Chuya, do you know who your soulmate is?" Fukuzawa asked, and Chuya's eyes widened with surprise. He glanced down at his arms, which were uncovered, the bright blue lines on view for anyone to see. He sat up straight, looking around for his hoodie, spotting it on the seat Dazai had been sitting on. "How many people saw them?" Chuya asked, his voice panicked as he glanced between Dazai and Fukuzawa. Dazai winced, looking visibly upset, and Fukuzawa sighed. "Anyone who was outside when you fainted. Yosano had Dazai take your hoodie off because you were far too warm. According to her, Dazai wasn't going to do it until she said it would make you worse if he didn't. So I would assume he is aware of your situation?" Chuya nodded guiltily, looking down at the floor, his feet dangling a few inches from the ground, whereas Dazai's shoes brushed the dirty linoleum with every swing of his legs. Fukuzawa sighed again. Chuya had never realized how often he did that, and his lips quirked up with amusement, but it was quickly shut down when Fukuzawa spoke again. "I'm going to assume that you don't know. The school can't do anything to make you tell us who your soulmate is if you don't want to, but we are worried about whoever they may be. We can't force you to find them or tell us who they are, but if you do, we would like to be able to try and help them." Chuya felt sick again as he nodded along numbly to Fukuzawa's words. He wished that the school did have something to force him to tell, or a magical way of finding his soulmate. Then maybe he wouldn't feel so guilty, and he wouldn't have this internal conflict over what he should do. He nodded once more, and Fukuzawa stood up, walking to the door. "That is all. Please, if you find them, tell a member of the staff. You are free to return to class now. If you feel faint again, then come back and someone will arrange for you to go home." Chuya made a vague sound of agreement, and Fukuzawa left, the silence deafening as the door to the first aid room swung shut. Dazai got off the bed, going to their bags and sitting them upright. Chuya watched as Dazai fiddled with the patches Chuya had on his bag, moving to play with a safety pin, holding one on. "Fukuzawa asked if I was your soulmate, you know," Dazai said, amusement in his tone. Chuya raised an eyebrow, and Dazai turned back to face him with a smile. "Genuinely, he asked me about the bandages and if they were still for the skin sensitivity." Chuya laughed a little, drinking some more of the forgotten water in his hand before responding. "That's stupid. Imagine if we were soulmates. Bleh," he said with an exaggerated shudder, missing the hurt that flashed across Dazai's expression. "Yeah," Dazai said, swinging his bag over his shoulder. "That's stupid. Besides, if I was, it wouldn't be cuts, it would be bruises. You know that. Imagine it, you covered in blue bruises." Chuya raised an eyebrow, a little confused at Dazai's tone. Still, he shrugged and slipped off the bed himself, grabbing his own bag. "I'm assuming I was unfortunate enough to miss the end of lunch?" he asked, grimacing as they left the nurse's office to the mostly empty main office. "Yeah, we've missed the first half of English though. Plus, when I spoke to Mr. Fukuzawa earlier, he said that he'd tell our teachers would be late for us." Dazai explained in a sing-song voice as he skipped through the empty corridors. A student passed by, and her eyes instantly went from where they'd normally go, the bandages around Dazai's arms, to Chuya's arms, and the blue lines covering them. Suddenly, Chuya understood where Fukuzawa had been coming from in assuming that Dazai was his soulmate. They seemed an odd pair to most, constantly arguing and making fun of each other, yet jumping to each other's defense the moment someone else chimed in. They were more physically affectionate with each other than most boys their age, almost always touching or holding hands. The two would be sitting leaning on each other, or Chuya would sit between Dazai's legs and get his hair braided while they were both actively making fun of the other. And Chuya was also openly gay. It wasn't the first time people would assume they were dating, and now it wouldn't just be people assuming they're dating, but soulmates. Yuck. As Chuya thought this, he realized that the thought wasn't quite as sickening as he thought it would be. Maybe he's just so used to being around Dazai all the time that being soulmates wouldn't mean much. They'd just be platonically soulmates. That happens sometimes. Yeah, platonic soulmates. He'd never like Dazai like that, and Dazai would never like him like that. Platonic, 100%. They're not soulmates anyway, so it's fine. Dazai was right. If they were soulmates, he'd be permanently covered in bruises. Dazai has no reason to lie about what's under his bandages, and Mori has confirmed what they are used for. And while Mori may be unsettling, he's Dazai's father, a doctor, and has no reason to lie either. Chuya frowned, crossing his arms self-consciously as they came to the English classroom. Nobody noticed aside from the teacher as they slipped into the back of the class, heading to their normal seats, which were near the door anyway. Higuchi was at the table with Tachihara, and they both waved at him, mostly disregarding Dazai. Chuya waved back as he sat down, waiting for the teacher to finish speaking before he started speaking to his friends, who had already noticed his arms. "Right, listen, it's nothing bad, and you don't need to worry about it," he said quickly before Higuchi or Tachihara could say anything. "It looks bad," Higuchi protested, reaching over to take his arm and inspect it. "Is this from your soulmate?" she asked worriedly. Chuya briefly registered Dazai getting up and muttering something about going to the bathroom, and he nodded in response to both Dazai and Higuchi. "Yeah, my soulmate," he admitted begrudgingly. Tachihara took a sharp breath in, also looking concerned as he batted Higuchi's hand away from Chuya's arm. "That's not good, mate. Your soulmate must be right fuck to do something like that," Tachihara said, eyeing the blue lines mistrustfully. "Those look painful. Does it hurt?" Chuya sighed and shook his head. "No, it doesn't. At least it hasn't yet. Dazai did some research and some people said theirs hurt, so it might just be different from person to person," he explained as he shifted in his chair. Higuchi nodded in relief. "That's good then," she said. Tachihara quickly chimed in with a scowl. "I'd kill your soulmate myself if he ended up hurting you in his own self-hatred. That's not fair to you," Tachihara said protectively, his tone faintly disgusted. Higuchi looked slightly uncomfortable with the words, and Chuya also felt a bit weird about it. It wasn't his soulmate's fault that it might hurt him. His soulmate might not even know that Chuya had his mark yet. "It's a good thing it doesn't hurt then," Higuchi said with a nervous smile. "Right, Chuya?" Chuya was about to respond when there was a sudden sharp pain in his left arm. He made a slight hiss of pain, pulling his arms into his chest and wincing. "Ow! What the fuck?" he nearly yelled, drawing the attention of other people nearby. Higuchi reached forward to take his wrist and pull it away from his chest, assuming he had managed to hurt himself in a way she could help with. Instead, Chuya saw her freeze, along with other people watching, as a clear patch of skin in the middle of his arm was split in half by a bright blue line. The pain died away in seconds, just tingling slightly, but Chuya felt sick as he watched another line being drawn on his skin like he was being painted on. The room went quiet quickly as people realized what was happening, most people aware of the original marks and Chuya's fainting incident by now. After 5 lines had appeared, it stopped and the tingling faded. Now that the spectacle was over, most people slowly looked away, whispering amongst themselves. But Chuya stayed frozen, staring at his arm with a pale face, feeling like he might throw up. Higuchi and Tachihara were dead silent, the three just sitting and staring at the new lines. None of them knew what to do or how to react, dumbfounded as their brains struggled to process what had just happened. Without saying anything, they all just turned their attention to what they had been previously doing. Higuchi and Tachihara returning to their work and Chuya just staring at the table. What the fuck was he supposed to do with that? The area that his soulmate had just hurt was a little itchy, his skin crawling as his mind replayed the memory over and over. The thought of his soulmate doing something like that. Unbidden, an image flashed to the front of his mind, of a brunette sitting facing away from him, and blood dripping from his arms. Chuya felt even sicker, shaking the thought away violently, causing Higuchi to look at him again. Before she could speak, Dazai had returned and dropped back into his seat, humming a song. Chuya jumped in surprise, and Dazai froze, looking around the silent table. "What happened?" Dazai asked cautiously, his tone giving away that he already had a suspicion. Chuya showed Dazai his arm wordlessly, and he felt Dazai's fingers graze over the marks. "Ah," was all Dazai said, but he moved his hand into Chuya's, holding tightly. Chuya squeezed back, and after a moment he looked over at Dazai, who was staring blankly at the lines covering Chuya's arms, his face pale. Dazai seemed to be thinking about something, and he wished he knew what it was. After a moment, Dazai sighed and looked back at Chuya, smiling sadly. "I'm sorry." Chuya did a double take, blinking in confusion. "What?" he asked, furrowing his eyebrows, trying to figure out what Dazai meant. What does he have to be sorry about? Being annoying? "On behalf of your soulmate," Dazai clarified quickly. "I'm sorry," he said, looking genuinely apologetic. Chuya rolled his eyes. What was with Dazai and apologizing recently? "You didn't make my soulmate decide to hurt himself in the middle of my English class," he said, huffing slightly as he slid down in his chair, tapping the desk with his free hand. Dazai looked slightly ill and turned away, but Chuya paid it no attention. "I'll be fine, I'll get over it. I was just surprised," he said, shrugging casually, trying not to let on how much it had actually affected him. "It hurt me for a moment, though," he added, glancing at Dazai thoughtfully. "Your theory was correct. Just it only hurt for a moment while the injury was being made, so congrats on a theory well spun." Dazai met Chuya's eyes for a moment. Dazai had always been a master at hiding or downplaying how he was feeling, but he looked genuinely distraught over the thought of Chuya's soulmate causing him pain. After a moment, Dazai cleared his throat and spoke tensely. "I'm gonna kill your soulmate." Coming from Dazai, it sounded like even less of a joke than it had from Tachihara. Right on cue, Tachihara chimed in. "That's what I said," he hissed angrily. "I'm gonna kill that asshole. It's not fair for him to bring Chuya down in his own self-destruction." Higuchi hit Tachihara on the arm and glared at both Tachihara and Dazai. "Can we please stop threatening Chuya's soulmate? I get it, you don't want Chuya to be hurt, but Chuya can handle himself, and his soulmate is clearly very mentally ill. Threatening him won't solve anything," she said firmly, and Tachihara visibly wilted. Chuya cleared his throat awkwardly. Yeah, thanks, Higuchi. I can handle myself, and I don't need you guys threatening my soulmate. Given the extent of these injuries, I should probably be grateful he's even still alive. Suddenly, it had gotten even quieter. Chuya hadn't thought it was possible for the atmosphere to get any thicker. After a few moments, the teacher called the attention of the class, explaining what the homework for the week was going to be. Dazai's hand left his own. A glance at him showed him to have crossed his arms and started staring at his bandages. Chuya tried to ignore how his gut twisted at the sight, and instead tried to think about how much time he'd have with Dazai doing all his homework. Hi? I'm sorry. Let me explain. I took a 7-month break for totally justifiable reasons. Please don't kill me. But for real though, I'm sorry for disappearing once again without notice. That was my longest hiatus yet, and there were a culmination of reasons, but I'm not gonna tire you all with those. Instead, I'm happy to announce that I'm back, alive and kicking, and will try to upload again at a steady rate in time. I have a bunch of fics that are mainly requests from all over Spotify, YouTube, and Tumblr, and I'm excited to share them with y'all, so stay tuned. Also, drumroll please, I'm on SoundCloud now. Just re-uploaded the first Podfic I've made on there, and I'll gradually re-upload the rest of the fics till we catch up on there. Please support the channel as it's gonna be a big help to boost it. And yeah, that's basically all the updates I have. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. If you'd like to kindly show more support, I'm available on Ko-fi, and Super Thanks is now available. Hope you have a great Christmas, and thank you for listening.